Welcome to Global Response, where the climate crisis meets opportunity. U.S. climate policy is being dismantled, and the world is moving forward without us. Europe, Asia, and the Global South are embracing policies to nurture climate innovation and supporting founders and investors who are developing and scaling solutions. Solar, batteries, and EVs have demonstrated the tipping point. Sustainable solutions can compete, scale, and dominate. Whether you're building, investing, or looking for hope in the face of climate denial, explore a world of opportunities with us. Today's guest is Aman Chahal, the founder and CEO of CleanTecher, a full-stack technology strategy consulting firm for Canadian climate companies. Aman is the former project manager and investment lead at Sustainable Development Technology Canada, where she oversaw $200 million in clean tech investments. Her passions are theater, storytelling, and using technology to solve human problems. And her superpowers are compulsion to speak truth to and about powerful people. Welcome, Aman. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. I'm a bit of a Canadian technology junkie. I love the Canadian ecosystem for what it can bring in terms of technology development and what we have the ability to create here. I think that the Canadian government and governments in Canada at successive levels have done a lot of great work in investing in these technologies and being able to bring them as far as they can. And I think what we need now is inroads to find a job for these technologies, find markets for them, and commercialize them. So I'm really excited to see what we can do and what we can achieve here with a collaboration with the U.S. Compatriots here.
In terms of policy, where do things stand in Canada at this point?
It's no secret that Canada is an extractive country, and we do a lot with extractive resources. Our Prime Minister, is an economist who fully believes in climate change. He has worked on the climate file and brought that in with his work at the UN and at other banks as well. And so he's talking a lot about net zero. We're seeing a bill was recently introduced and passed in Parliament, the Bill C5. That bill is intended really to address the trade war that we're having. Some of this rhetoric is sort of also making it evident to Canadians that interprovincially, so your state to state, but are for us interprovincially, trade is difficult. And it's difficult simply because of how we've done things in the past. And a lot of economic opportunity can be unlocked from that perspective as well. But Bill C5 is pegged as the nation building bill. So there's a lot of things that we have to build. And the great part of that is that when you have to do a lot of infrastructure development, and you've got this change in leadership at the executive prime minister level with somebody who is first and foremost an economist. I can't stress that enough. His quant background and his ability to understand how the financial markets work. His thesis is frankly in how do you increase trade interprovincially, and having somebody who has championed the climate cause at such a high level globally is a really, really great tick mark for us.
The Building Canada Act is the infrastructure outline, and I assume there's some funding that's been associated with that at this point, or budget
Right
set
now,
to it.
there's not funding associated with it. That is sort of a strategic direction that has been put forward by the incoming administration. Done right and executed properly, there's a huge amount of advantage in bringing everybody to the same table. And sort of, it's a win-win if we execute it right. And I think under this specific administration with Prime Minister Carney, who has private sector experience. And I think that's a very, very big asset for the Canadian ecosystem because we usually tend to have bureaucrats or career politicians in that role. But having somebody who has private sector experience is very, very valuable on that. I think he'll do a great job at convening these different parties together.
As I understand it, within C5, there is a specific requirement that any project has to be evaluated in terms of both the clean tech in general, or clean growth, and also meeting Canada's objectives with respect to climate. So Canada, I assume, is a member of the Paris Accords.
Yes, indeed. We did not repeal the Paris Accords. They were very important to us in 2015. I was still in school when they were signed, and all of a sudden there was this really jubilant atmosphere in Canada where, we finally had something, signed and ready. Hopefully, this type of a bill, a nation building bill like this, kind of puts those accords right back, because there's been a lot of, conversation within the climate community and the expert community that those accords have not achieved what they were supposed to achieve.
I mean, I know in Europe, EU regulations have these goals. I don't want to say front and center, but they're hardwired into a lot of policies. Does Canada have supportive climate policies outside these broad objectives?
So we have to talk about this in two different segments. The first is, do they have them? And the second is, what do they meaningfully actually mean right now? So, yes, everybody who has signed up to the Paris Accords must do certain things and must have certain metrics that are met. We all have to report back to the Paris Accords and show basically our report card. Now, the challenge there is we get to write our own report card, and that way you never really fail. The big thing here that we need is sort of, a standardization of how we're measuring these initiatives and the progress on them. And a really, really simple example of this is when we are starting to look at, a climate bill that has clean tech associated to it. The thing that most of us measure is GHGs saved, and that's just a projection of, someone calculating in an Excel file how many greenhouse gases have been saved. Now, they don't look at that pragmatically. So you can stack GHGs saved. So the same dollar can save like 50 tons of GHGs if you stack your GHGs properly. And I think that's one area of mitigation where we need to come in and perhaps have something a little bit more realistic.
So let's take off the policy hat for a second, though, and shift into your investment fund lead hat, and let's talk about like what opportunities have the Paris agreements and/or government policy about climate created for startup founders or investors or people who are looking for places to set roots down for their climate ambitions.
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to boast a little bit of patriotism. SDTC, which is the fund where I worked, started in 2002, and it was one of the earliest funds. It had the ability to kind of to help startup founders. So startup founders in two industries mimic each other. The one industry that you will be more familiar with is perhaps medical devices, and then you have, clean tech. Clean tech is a heavy capital industry, and it's front loaded. Effectively, software, you can just whip up some code, do an MVP pretty quickly and show it to an investor, kind of convince them of what you're going to do. It's easier to take chances in those areas. But with clean tech, unless you have front loaded like $5 million of capital to be able to just buy the equipment that you need so that you can then demonstrate something. So an example of this can be, let's say you're a company that's doing recycling for plastics. And what you need to do is buy, a bunch of technology so you can put that plastic in it and then test it. So you're basically buying a technology you think is going to be destroyed in the testing process. But that amount of money that, founders have to get, first of all, for an investor to pay that in, there's no assurances that these technologies are going to work. So, organizations and government funds from the Paris Accords were mandated to spend a certain amount of money on technology development and sort of mitigation properties there. And that had the ability to bring in government funding at the front end. So something like SDTC had significant value because, you as a founder could go to SDTC and say, listen, I need in total for this project, I need about $10 million. Can you give me, how much money can you give me, and when can I get it? And SDTC was a great fund because what it would do is it would give you the money after you signed the deal. So, you would get money right as the deal was signed. You would just get it to be able to buy equipment. So you could then have these deals, buy your equipment, test it out. In addition to that, it mandated that you have industry experts and commercialization partners with you. So you're not just building this in isolation as a science project. The value of an organization like that was actually that you're building it and you're building it with industrial partners who want to use it. So if you're building something that has to do with mining, you're not building it in isolation. You're going to the mine, You're sitting with your customer, you're developing this technology that can abate arsenic, that can sort of, remedy that environmental damage. And that had the ability to bring in investors at the right time. So you would get a lot of interested investors being like, listen, once you hit this deliverable or this stage for us, we will come in.
SDTC is gone. Is that support still available in Canada?
This fund has been folded now into NRC IRAP, which is a long-standing fund that has been running. One could say that sometimes that SDTC was perhaps its own MVP. It was its own startup in a way. The Canadian government, with a lot of academics, a lot of experts came together and said, we've got this moment of opportunity. Let's try something private sector. So they tried it, and now what we know is that there is a need for it, and we need to organize it a little bit better. So while that fund in its original form no longer exists, those principles and that knowledge still exist, and that fund is now ran out of NRC IRAP. But I think with the nation building bill C5 or act, what we can see is that there is a huge appetite to continue to do this. Our startup community is extremely professional. They've worked very, very hard to get the industry to where it is. And it's high time that we started to reap the benefits of that kind of investment from the government side. These funds will not go away. They will most likely, what you'll see is a formalization and a professionalization, perhaps, of some of those funds. MVP2 of clean tech funding in Canada looks to be extremely sharp and extremely bright. We do need some salespeople. We do need some CEOs with the brashness of being able to get out there and sell those technologies and find markets internationally. And I think that's one area where American founders are quite well regarded and quite well known globally for sort of having that spirit of capitalism first. I'll say Canadians are indeed a bit polite, and perhaps we don't lead with our technology heft. We kind of like to sit in the background and let our technology speak for itself. But I think we need a little bit more sophistication in the sales cycle here.
I do want to circle back and talk about some of those early successes, but can you talk to me about the talent pool in Canada?
The talent pool in Canada is amazing. We've got the most educated population in the world. We've got the most amount of post-secondary, tertiary degrees per capita in I think it's the G7. In addition to that, our talent pool is global. So that's a really, really important thing to understand, because if you're selling clean tech, you have to sell it internationally. And you need to be able to speak the international language of the world, the international corporate language of the world. And that language is broken English, math, and, let's go for karaoke. So, there is this internationalization of the talent pool here that is amazing. We also have linkages to almost every global major university because of the fact that our immigrants are so well educated. Everybody speaks English. We've got very strict English rule regulations coming into the immigration system. They all have to pass an exam called TOEFL. So you're not going to find someone in Canada who doesn't speak English.
How would you compare professional salaries in Canada, say, to the United States?
Our salaries are always lower than your salaries, and then you get the Canadian dollar arbitrage, sort of the exchange rate issue as well. But that makes us cheaper for you to hire, and we can still have, a great lifestyle with that. So I think from the perspective of competitive salaries, it's easier to hire somebody at an extremely high caliber here and pay them, frankly, an international discount compared to the US salary. I think you're in California, your salaries there are extremely high, and your quality of life tends not to be so bad. I'm calling in from Edmonton, and you can buy a pretty nice house for a family here with $500,000. Yeah, so it's not that difficult here.
What policies does the government offer that you think would help support a climate tech founder, be it somebody who came to SDTC or an American or others who are looking at Canada as a home for their ambition?
So first and foremost, if you're coming into Canada and you're going to help us do economic development, the governments are really looking for individuals like that. I would advocate If it's possible, not a one-on-one effort, but if there could be a bit of a coordinated effort, that would enable the governments at every jurisdiction to kind of come to the table and help settle these individuals. So that would include, how do we get you help with housing? How do we get you help with all these? How do we plug you into the local communities in terms of getting talent? Then, in addition to that, what you would get is, funds like My Tax. My Tax is one of my favorite Canadian funds because its entire job is to mobilize students into this field. All I have met in the last little while are students who want to work in climate change and climate tech. So, sustainability, climate tech, this is sort of the flavor of this generation. And so, having a fund like My Tax enables those individuals to get their first jobs. Or do their theses. So if you're looking at coming in as an academic, perhaps as a PhD student, that is another avenue where somebody can come in. You can go PhD to PhD transfer from the school side. That might be a little bit easier. Then you're also able to get things like NSERC. NSERC funding or SHIRC funding. This is Tri-Council funding. This type of funding enables research type of activities. Founders in the clean tech space here also get things like SHRED. SHRED is this program that we have that gives you tax incentives to do innovation work, research work. Then on top of that, you've got, different regions have economic development councils. So, in Alberta here, we'll have Western Economic Development Council. And then, each sort of segment has these entities that have funding that they are also willing to bring into the table. And then you have these federal funds like the Strategic Innovation Fund, NRC, IRAP. Then you've got, challenges being run out of NRCan. So you need to be able to, the challenge here is not that there is not a lot of funding available or grants available to help facilitate this move. If you're coming in, the challenge here is it tends not to be coordinated and organized. So, for one individual to go out doing this kind of effort themselves, it's really, really difficult. It's a little bit distracting. So that's why I'm advocating for the fact that if you come in as a group or you come in and look at an entity, who kind of knows about these different systems, that's a little bit easier. But there's money in pockets everywhere. And you just kind of have to go find it and organize it for yourselves. But the other challenge that we'll have to look at is if you're a US founder, US citizen coming into Canada, perhaps there, might be certain rules or regulations where you need to Canadianize in certain ways, whether that is having a Canadian co-founder or looking at something of that nature for your company's architecture and structure. That would be something that would also have to most likely be looked at from the perspective of how to get this kind of grant funding.
Now, you mentioned all of these different programs and that they're, pockets of money in different places. Are there any consultants, resources, partners, other funds, people who do a good job of helping coordinate and identify that the opportunities or the resources that are available for startups?
To be honest, I do this work, and so far I have been doing this work ad hoc. This is one of the reasons, if you're in clean tech in Canada, you can't quit. Because if you're, helping other individuals, then you end up in this place where everybody's always coming to you for help. So I help. I'm not aware of anybody else who is doing this kind of work in the manner that I'm doing it. But, there's got to be other people out there who are trying to make it a little bit more efficient to do economic development in the clean tech space here.
The angel funds or other groups?
You have the best funding ecosystem. Please bring us investors. We do have angel funds here, but I have not been impressed with them. I'll take a step back here and I'll do a US-Canada comparison on the side of taking risk. We're talking right now about a risk-heavy industry. And even though clean tech, I don't think clean tech is a risky industry at all anymore. I think clean tech is all disruptive technology. All of it has been proven. It just needs to be implemented. Having said that, our investor community, our business community, our governments, they all look down south for leadership. And so what you'll see then is that, the United States will make a move. And then after the United States has made a move, that move ends up going into Toronto. Toronto is the place that then mimics that move. and then it kind of moves around from there. But we don't really have a lot of sophisticated individuals here who are taking risks. I haven't seen investors that are willing to kind of put their money where their mouth is. They do love talking about being vanguards in these industries, but I have to say that this is another thing that the United States can bring up north. Bring your investors, bring that culture with it that is risk forward, that is willing to kind of put your money where your mouth is and take some chances here. And so at this point, when you're looking at this ecosystem, Kevin O'Leary is there, Chamath Palihapitiya is there. Like we somebody graduates from a Canadian school and they're like, I want to make it big. They're like, let's go to the United States. I'm probably the only one who was like, no, I'm staying here. You know, no, we're not taking Kevin back. You can send us Chamath, but Kevin's yours now. He's your problem.
How do you perceive the Canadian brand, and is that do you think that's one of the strengths that maybe needs to be leaned into a bit?
I think the Canadian brand, will never really change from being nice. And, we're sort of seeing this. And this is my challenge is, I'm Canadian, but I would not classify myself as being polite and nice. I'm very direct. And I'm very business forward and direct. But, I think Canada is also looking at, this is a huge moment of international global flux. You have to understand that you're not the United States. Like, the United States has thus far been a global power. And so, with the implosion of the reputation of the United States, everything that's attached to you, Canada especially, we're all sort of having this moment, like scratching our heads, thinking, "Oh, geez, like where do we go now if this is what's going on in the U.S.?" And so, everyone is rethinking their own personalities and their own self identity. We are looking at this from the perspective of, listen, we said we're the good guy. We said we're the peacekeeper in the world. And this is how we're being treated now. And so you're going to see a resurgence of Canadian pride, and that will probably carry the day. We have to kind of grow up and become our own identity. And, as a nation, we're 150 years old, maybe. And, it's high time for us to quit our terrible twos and, maybe go get a job and sort of look at this as okay, listen, we have to do this on our own. Big Brother's not always going to help us.
Can you talk about some of the successes in clean tech?
Yeah, so you guys like to do a lot of the announcements, but in the world of quantum computing, you've got Xanadu and D-Wave. ICQ was our original sort of government funded research lab, and then we've got a huge quantum computing advantage over you on the technical side, I would say. Xanadu, you're hearing a lot about. D-Wave, you may or may not have heard about, but incredible companies. I had the chance to work with them. I've never seen technologies that forward, extremely business forward practices. You've got General Fusion. It's really interesting to go talk to companies that are these, you meet these founders and you're like, well, what are you doing with General Fusion? They're like, well, we thought we would make a fusion reactor on a budget. So, they've kind of gone and done really, really interesting things. They've had to do really cool collaborations with different people. How do you even simulate those types of technologies? So one of the advantages of these types of technology companies is that it's not just what they're building, it's the number of things they have to build in order to be able to bring that vision to fruition. So let's talk about something like, how do you simulate the power of a fusion reactor? Like, a fusion reactor is extremely powerful. So we've heard stories of these individuals having to take a volleyball, load it up with C4, and then go blow it up and then see what the sensor said. So General Fusion is another great company. I think they're going to come up with, if not the fusion reactor, then extremely smart technologies. In the world of small modular nuclear reactors, first and foremost, I have to mention Chalk River is a government like, it's one of the best places in the world to go. I had watched Good Will Hunting, and then I went there, and then I remember commenting to someone that I would love to be a janitor at Chalk River. They have done some of the most evolved testing on a lot of these nuclear technologies that were coming, a lot of fuels that are based on thorium, all of this sort of mixed nuclear technology. Canada has a huge supreme sort of advantage in nuclear because we've got, in Ontario, a lot of nuclear power is sort of run out of there. So we do a lot of testing. The two companies that I'll mention, they're Terrestrial Energy and Saltworks. that have both kind of been funded by SDTC. Very, very excited to see where they go. They're looking, the challenge with some of these that I've mentioned is that their funding ends up being like once you go through first and second round, now you're talking about big ticket funding. And so that's where they sort of start to have to look for international funds. And that's where the advantage of having American investors who understand the gravity and the scale of these things would be helpful. In the field of we're hearing a lot about microplastics and sort of taking over the waterways, showing up in our brains. Green Mantra and Pyrowave are two companies that have done extremely sophisticated work in that field, doing different types of things. I know pyrolysis is being used to kind of help with recycling some of the like styrene and styrofoam stuff that you don't usually see being put into traditional recycling bins. That type of plastic is now starting to be recycled. And then, in the satellite space, we've got GHE Stat, which is a really, really incredible company. One of the other ones that I'll mention in terms of, so we're talking a lot about data centers. We're seeing a lot of this stuff about, heavy compute, needing more data centers. Data centers are running hot just because we've got a lot of AI code that's being written badly, that's being processed. And so they continue to grow. But one of the cool things with data centers is that if you are able to get the information into the data center a little bit easier, it might be helpful. So we've got Renovus here that's doing quantum dot technology to be able to, pack in a lot more information going into a data center than you would see traditionally on a normal 5 cable going in. So, and this is, I've mentioned not even the tip of the iceberg here. The Canadian government has made available publicly a list of about 392 companies that have been funded from, SDTC specifically. Those companies are in various stages of requiring, whether it is, funding from angels and otherwise, whether it is collaborators with American founders who want to come in, join those companies and help grow those companies that already exist.
So it sounds like you're saying there's an opportunity or a need really in the C-suite for some of the
Yes.
serial entrepreneurs out of Silicon Valley. Maybe they don't know anything about hard tech, but they've been in that space of how to transition into the growth phase.
Yes, we have no capacity, and it's difficult to have this conversation with founders. I've had this conversation a few times. Technology founders sometimes are self-reflective enough that they back out, but they're not often. And, that's a challenge that we have because, and I can't not talk about this because it bothers me a lot, but Mike Lazaridis was never able to be convinced that the phone was going to that screen side, and he loved the keyboard, and they had a contract with the government to kind of do that, and we were never able to convince him. And I think that speaks volumes to who Canada is as a nation. We are nerdy. We're extremely nerdy. We do the technology piece really, really well, but we are very, very risk averse in the sense that we can't get the MVP out. We feel like, the MVP coming out is embarrassing because it's glitchy. We're just not good at barreling through that commercialization stage. So if you've got, founders who are serial founders, we need the C-suite repacked. We need the C-suite repacked with like C-suite with people who are like looking at this thing like this is time to move on. Like it's time to find an international market or be able to say like, stop doing this product development. We don't have a market for it. Because what we end up getting is these technology founders who fall in love with their tech and then they keep going for government funds and then government funders. I mean, we're 40 million people. So, once you're in the government funding suite, people know you and they keep giving you money. But at the same account, it's like, well, you're not selling anything. And it's difficult for Canada to both stop giving you money when you're not selling anything. And it's difficult for the founder to stop, working on a project that is, their life's work. We need some serious serial founders who have proven capacity to commercialize, to come in here and say, listen, I don't need to know the nitty gritty of what's going on here. Let's just sell this technology.
Okay, so in fact, not necessarily founders in this case, but people to come into companies that are let's say they've learned to crawl, they've learned to walk, but they don't actually they haven't actually figured out how to move forward. You're finishing up a presentation to a bunch of climate tech folks and the entire community here in in the U.S., and it's your chance to make the pitch. Why should they consider starting or moving their climate tech dreams to Canada?
First and foremost, you should come here because it's a match made in heaven. You've got the right skill set that, formulates the yin and the yang. We need, people who know what they're doing, who have done it before, who are hungry to make money. And somebody who's willing to move just has that entrepreneurial spirit, which first and foremost, Canada kind of lacks a little bit. Number two, we've got cheap labor. And we've got cheap labor stuck in jobs and places where, if you give them a job and you're coming up here, they're going to hustle for you. So our immigrant population is extremely hustle forward. Our younger generation is very hustle forward. These people are not expecting the government to have a standardized job for them. They're not looking that the government is going to be able to provide for their retirement. So they want to work. They want to work and they're educated, and it's cheap. It's cheap to set up here. It's cheap to work here. And it's cheap to have a great lifestyle.
What's the next tipping point technology, or the tipping point solution that looks like it's about to become inevitable? What do you think that thing that the next place that the investors should be looking at, saying this technology is ready to explode?
Investments. I think double blinding investment. People always talk about these tipping point technologies, these linchpin technologies. There's no such thing. Technologies, basically, the entire system has to be retrofit with micro solutions to be able to make it more efficient. What is the biggest hurdle to doing this? It is investors who think that they know what they're doing. And we see this, this is not the answer that other people want, because most people want a technology answer. So I'll say, artificial intelligence being used to do investments in a double blind way that sort of credit the actual technology and its use and its commercial ability. Our problem has nothing to do with, do we have the technology? Our problem has nothing to do with, is the technology proven? The technology was proven 10 years ago. Everything in clean tech is disruptive technology. Clayton Christensen would stand here with me and say the same thing. The only problem we have is this false understanding in the people who deploy capital, that they think that they know how to deploy capital. And I'm going to go all the way back here to Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell would not have invented the phone if his investor had anything to do with it, because his investor wanted him to do something else and he continued to bother him. But it was because of his fiance or what have you that she was just like, he knows what he's doing. And eventually he gets funding from his investor to do what is pioneering work. Investors have what Daniel Kahneman and Douglas Hubbard call the expert myth. They think they know what they're doing, and therefore any data that comes and contradicts that narrative, that self narrative, they will delete. And this is the one place where I'll plug this. Even by accident, even by complete sheer accident, a smart investor should have, as in their portfolio, more than 3% of funding allocated to women. And I'm not talking about that because women need more funding. I'm talking about that because that's how many women are in clean tech.
Thanks, Aman. We're going to end it here with that very provocative thought. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here on Climate Response.